welcome to Build. I hope everybody's had a really wonderful first day. And I want to thank you personally for joining us at 4 o'clock. That is always, especially for the folks who have traveled, and this is the worst time in the day when you're on a different cycle. This is usually the time when your body just tells you, I need to sleep. So thank you. I will probably dial it up a notch just to help 4 o'clock be a little bit funner. A little bit more caffeine. For the folks that were here, I just had a gummy bear, so, you know, we'll keep it going. So I have to, first and foremost, I do have to drive from my laptop. My name is Jennifer Perret. I am so lucky to be joined by Shrunga Malavalli and Clemens Reijnen. I said it wrong. Reijnen? Okay. And today we're here to talk about application reliability with Azure Load Testing and Chaos Studio. So you've basically found the folks who really, really love to break things. It's so fun. But before we get started, I do have to do the quick awareness, privacy notice. This session will be recorded. We have folks online already joining us. Thank you to all the folks online. Hope you can see us behind the desk. We also have some subject matter experts joining us online, so there will be, if you have questions for the folks online, there will be folks answering online as well. But I'll also do my best to try and keep an eye on some of those questions and bring them into the room. So really, really happy that you could join us today. What are we talking about today? I am supposed to remind you, I thought this was clever and funny when I saw the template for the slides. Apparently, I am supposed to make sure that you were actually in the spot you thought you were going to be in. So today we're going to be talking about load testing in Chaos Studio. How to engage. Feel free to raise your hand for folks in the room. We actually have Debbie, thank you, Debbie O'Brien, in the back with a microphone. She will run around so that we can hopefully hear your question. If not, those of us here in the room will do our best to repeat the question so that folks online can also hear it. And with that, because you've already heard me talk a lot, we are going to play a quick video. Again, a simple reminder of what we're here to talk about today. And hopefully the audio will work.
Application outages are often caused by failed deployments or erroneous releases. Additionally, the highly distributed and multi-tenant nature of Azure means that cloud infrastructure can sometimes fail too. That's why continuous validation is key in identifying potential issues as early as possible. For a mission-critical workload, chaos engineering and rigorous automated testing throughout the development process can help you achieve this goal. Start by doing a theoretical exercise to analyze failure modes, where you walk through possible failure scenarios. Based on the analysis, perform failure injection testing, also known as chaos engineering. To get meaningful results, perform load testing in parallel and evaluate how the application responds to the injected faults. We highly recommend integrating these tests into your CI/CD pipelines and running them during the early stages of feature development. For chaos testing, you can use Azure Chaos Studio, a managed Azure service that provides the ability to perform chaos experimentation by systematically injecting failures into application components and infrastructure. To produce synthetic user load on the application, use tools like the Azure Load Test Service. By using Azure Chaos Studio and Load Test Service in conjunction, you can observe how the application reacts to issues, as well as its ability to self-heal in response to infrastructure or application failures. For efficient, continuous validation, avoid manual intervention when deploying the application, generating load, running chaos experiments, and collecting results. Detect issues early in the engineering lifecycle to reduce the cost of resolution. Define a health model that makes the impact of failures observable and actionable. Continuous validation is essential to achieve reliability and response to change. Refer to these assets to confidently build validation into your mission-critical solution.
All right, so you've already met us. I will quickly ask, has anybody seen the mission critical frameworks or any of that information? I see some nods. Great. Anyone else? Do check out, if you are building services on top of Azure and really want that best of breed guidance and architecture, look at Azure Mission Critical. We thank them for the video, but it's a really great resource for architectural decisions along with the testing. Almost done with slides. One thing I wanted to highlight is some of the tools and services that we are building currently to help you both in reliability testing, but also in other types of testing. So today at 5 o'clock, right after this, we do have a playwright discussion session as well. It's right down the hallway. How many folks have heard of playwright? Anyone? Oh, love this. Okay, wonderful. So Debbie is here from the team as well. And we also have tomorrow morning our repeat of our virtual lab. So in that virtual lab, not only will we walk you through the testing, and we fixed the bug that we hit this morning for folks that were there, but we also will send you home with a full repo that you can use. In fact, that's my next slide. So one thing I wanted to highlight for everything, just before we get into the full discussion, last little slideware here in particular is this Contoso Traders Cloud Testing demo app. We have tried to put a real world example together with, you've got an AKS backend, you've got ACA in the backend, and throughout it you have demos that you yourself can walk through, both of Playwright tests, Azure Load tests, and Chaos Studio tests. We have heard and know that one of the best ways to get started with testing is having those examples. So with that, I am done in advertising mode, and I'd love to highlight a couple of questions just to get the room started. But if anyone has a question already and nobody needs a warm-up, let me know. Did you come here? No? Okay, let me ask this. Did anyone see load testing in several of the sessions today? In Amanda Silver's, okay. Did anyone see Scott Hunter and Brendan Burns' session? Nice, I see some nods. Excellent. Okay, so with load testing, we had two different examples in those sessions. In particular, one is really that shift left that we're trying to promote, which is sort of, hey, how do you get load tests and actually catch the regressions right at that code authoring time? And so in particular, we have a load action, a GitHub action. You can also plumb it into Azure pipelines, and you can set that failure criteria based on whatever SLO you've established. So that was the demo in Amanda's. And then the last other demo that I want to make sure and highlight so that folks can go back if they've missed it is the one in Scott Hunter and Brendan Burns, really about, well, how do I use load testing to help optimize the infrastructure? So in particular for that demo, what they were highlighting is doing multiple load tests across a series of 6 different parameters to ensure that that AKS backend wasn't over-provisioned. And that's a really, really useful capability where it's, hey, let's not put it in the pipeline. That'll take, it's an hour-long set of tests to run it over all those parameters. But that in particular is one that I'd love to make sure you all saw. Okay, I am going to put Shrunga on the spot now. So, Shrunga, fair warning, just to warm up the dialogue. One of the favorite things that I have about Chaos Studio is that it's literally designed to break things. Right? So, like I said, one of my favorite things about focusing on testing and resiliency testing is literally we get to break things. So that's really cool. But if Chaos Studio is designed to break things, what are some of the safety measures in place to ensure that malicious users, nefarious actors, and the wrong things don't happen?
So Chaos Studio is controlled chaos, right? Like the word chaos invites all of those ideas of you just go about breaking things. But I think what Chaos Studio actually lets you do is apply the scientific method to make sure that you're validating what you expect your system to behave like. And to answer that second part of your question, there's a lot of so what chaos engineering lets you do is deliberate fault injection into certain scenarios that you know or expect a certain outcome, and what you're doing is validating them.
Okay.
And so when you're hypothesizing your failure scenario and you're creating your experiments, one, you have a robust a permissions model within Chaos Studio. So
oh yes, I get tripped up by that all the time.
Yeah, your permissions model is very important because you allow specifically what the experiment can do to these resources, right? So you add contributor permissions if you're impacting a VM and stuff like that. So that's one way to prevent anything unintended happening.
Okay.
Also, you can control the actions that you can target or use on your targets.
Okay.
And targets are basically the resources that you've onboarded to inject fault into within Chaos Studio.
Okay.
And so you can manage the capabilities or the actions that that you have on those targets. So that's one other way to
that makes a lot of sense.
Mitigate any risk. But we highly encourage you to do it, earlier on in your release pipeline. So not necessarily unless you're comfortable with the process and mature. Don't go into the shift right side of things, which is
until you're ready
production.
for that. Yes.
Do it in your CI/CD like you talked about.
Okay. And now I've got one ask as well. What are your 2 to 3 favorite faults right now that you wish everybody building an Azure service would run? Because I bet Clemens has some ideas. He's just like, oh, I got some.
I think. So the 3, I would say off the top of my head, that are the most important scenarios that we encourage everybody to go check out for themselves, because these are common dependencies that everybody has when working with Azure, is AAD down. So what happens if Azure Active Directory is unavailable, which is something that everybody uses, and it can be a high impact outage if you're not prepared for it. And then DNS failure is the second one.
Yeah, that one's my favorite because, it's always DNS, right? I mean, aren't we still saying that, please? Yeah? Okay, thank you.
So DNS failure is another one, and the last one would be availability zone down. So there's always instances of data centers, natural disasters, or just some unexpected occurrence, and you're the
storms that hit certain data centers, we can't control the thunderstorms. Okay.
Yeah, what happens when your service, even if you've configured it to be zonally redundant, is that true? How does it behave? How does it impact availability?
That's a really
How
good
does
point.
it, affect your customers, right? So all of these things. So we would say those are the 3 most impactful things.
Most important. Okay.
Yeah, and look at your live sites, right? That will give you another.
Oh, that's a really good point too. So analysis of your live sites to sort of say, okay, when are we going out when we shouldn't? Clemens, what would you add to that? Because I saw you kind of physically go, oh, I've got a dream list of faults, or load tests. You can pick on me as well.
Yeah. Definitely, there are multiple out there.
And I should probably back up and have you introduce yourself and sort of kind of a little bit more of your background and why we brought you up on stage, sir.
Oh yeah, and thank you for having me.
Yes, we're so
nice.
happy to have you here.
It's actually by accident, but that's a different story. And when you were talking about the time zone difference, I'm already starting to get tired there. I'm in the Amsterdam time zone, so forgive me when I'm a little bit slower today. So on the chaos testing, I like also the caching. Caching goes down.
Yes, that's a really good point.
You introduce caching, you solve one problem, you get 2 problems back.
Yes.
The normal sentence. So what happens when that goes down? It's shut down your Redis cache, for example. It's quite interesting how your system is going to behave there. So that would be my chaos story. Around load. Just my introduction. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I realized I was like, oh, I should have done this before.
So I work for a global system integrator as a CTO for Microsoft Technologies, Capgemini. Maybe you know it. And we are supporting many organizations, many enterprises to adopt modern technologies, modern cloud development technologies. And often the discussion immediately starts with, what if things go down?
Right.
And then we have now a mechanism with chaos testing to prove that when things go down, because it will happen, that it will stay alive.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very nice promise what we can bring to our customers there. So on the load testing part, I was supporting one organization which has in every harbor in the world their system running. We were expanding that to those harbors. And what happens when one harbor goes down, and what happens then with the other one? And so more the, let's say, kind of supply chain challenge there. We put a lot of load on one part of the chain, and what happens with the rest of the chain? I think the most obvious one is, hey, I'm building a website with a store in there, and I'm doing an ad campaign in one country, and then the checkout system in the other country goes down. Actually, we had those kinds of problems in the past. That's where we recognized there was one router problem into our system because the ad campaign went through that one router. We didn't know that. It was not our router, luckily. That's so that would be my two stories there.
Okay. And one other thing that I've noticed, and I don't know who here in the audience, has anyone here done any sort of wide-scale chaos engineering testing, Chaos Studio or not? Anyone yet? Okay. So one thing that was a real epiphany, like eye-opening to me, I was always thinking about fault injection, like, okay, I just want to see how the system survives. I just want to see if the system survives. What's that resiliency? And what we realized after running a lot of different drills and actual chaos across several teams, these are actually teams inside of Azure, what we found that was so insightful is how much more it helped us to check our monitoring. So how many of you are actually even, you think you have your monitoring, but once in a while something goes wrong and your customers are finding out about it first? That's the absolute, we don't want that to happen ever for any engineering team. And one of the things that I started to realize after getting to do a lot of these chaos tests with a bunch of different engineering teams is how valuable it was to actually go, now did we find out about it? Obviously with chaos, you're not hitting production. You are doing it in a sandbox within a safe environment. But can you actually see that the monitoring system that you have in place is actually alerting you? Is it pinging your devs, or is your dev team aware of it? How quickly are they aware of it? And that was a whole other side of chaos that I had never even sort of thought about because I was so focused on that failover, so focused on the resiliency. We just map over to this other, version, this other storage location, this other region, and I was like, oh, but this is really the greatest way possible to test your monitoring and your alert system to your engineers. Let me pause for a minute. I see a couple of questions on the chat, but I think they've been answered. Thank you so much, John. Folks online, feel free to also just keep bringing those questions in. Folks in the room, any other sort of resiliency questions all up? Load testing questions, chaos questions? You can tell I'll prime the pump with all sorts of questions. Yeah.
Bring some chaos.
They're all very shy.
Well, I think it's 4 o'clock. I think it's the 4 o'clock where it's like, okay. And I can see the folks that have really traveled halfway around the world to be here. So thank you again. We so appreciate getting to see you in person. All right, I got a question. Got to make sure Debbie's, earning her keep.
Oh, I was just curious about the time that it takes to implement this. So if we're on a deadline or a schedule and we want to do some chaos testing,
Yeah.
What's the general? It takes a day, a week, less than an hour.
Great question. So it depends, I think, somewhat on what you're going to do. So if we're talking about chaos, first and foremost, get in and explore Chaos Studio and look at the faults that you would want to exercise with. There are some faults that are so easy, as the ones Shrunga had mentioned, very easy, just wire them up. And again, where and how you'd run them into what environment, right? Your canary environment and sort of, you don't want it in prod, right? So in that sandbox environment and those kinds of places. Very quick and easy. So we can show it to you tomorrow, easily in the virtual lab, or if you want to pull me off to the side or Shrunga off to the side, literally adding a couple of faults very quick and easy. It's the, wait, let's make sure where are we targeting, which environment are we targeting, and then how are we going to actually analyze what we see? I think that's the trickiest part. Now, there are some faults that are very hard. And I will tell you, there is so much demand for faults that the Chaos Studio team is working around the clock to try and get even more faults available to folks. So do look at, well, what do we want to exercise first? And then that'll help. Anything else you'd add, Shrunga?
Yeah, I would say, like, I think you can always get started with, like, we would say just specific parts of your application that you know really well. So, like, you know the ins and outs of the architecture. Getting started is as, like, if you want to experiment with it and just try it out, that doesn't take much longer. You, of course, if you have VMs, you can try and do a shutdown and stuff like that, right? Like, what I would imagine takes, like, some amount of thinking and thought processes, building the processes around it. So, like, how do you implement, like, these, where a systematic way of, like, figuring out your service architecture, where your dependencies are, where you can inject disruption, that kind of prep work that goes into doing it consistently and continuously, which is something that we encourage every team to get to be resilient, I would say. But experimenting with it you should be up and running within, like, use our quick start guides on the documentation to try it out. And then another thing that we would encourage, definitely in the CI/CD vein, is along with, like, enabling synthetics through ALT, is get an ADO pipeline task going. That way you can automate the running of these experiments. So creating the experiment is not going to be that heavy of a lift at all. You would just once you configure the experiment, you can call it via our APIs, or use an ADO pipeline task that we have available in the Visual Studio Marketplace, so you can just integrate it into your release pipelines. So that automation happens without any extra overhead per se. So
and adding, go ahead and hand that mic, but before you go, Clemens, just to add to that, we have both Azure DevOps pipelines, but also in that Contoso Traders app, we show you how to do it in a GitHub action pipeline. So just know that when we talk testing, both are treated equally. And in fact, a lot of these can be in any pipeline, depending on what pipeline you use. So, Clemens, you had something to add there.
Just one small reality check on the time frame. It is definitely a team effort. And what you already said, the thinking before, that's the heavy lifting part. Do I have my system? What are my dependencies? What happens when this breaks down? Should I look at that? That's on that side. On the other side, shift right, it is indeed what the monitoring data is saying. Did the system go down before we noticed and the customers already knew it? Those are interesting chaos tests to implement there. From a technical perspective, creating a chaos test, it's nothing. But then when you're starting to run those tests, you need to notify your operation teams, hey, I'm going to run a chaos test. It is not something what Microsoft is going to do wrong. It's what I'm on purpose going to do wrong.
In their canary environment.
Very, very large systems, very large organizations, that can be quite a daunting task to get everybody notified. Also on load testing, it's not a DDS attack. It is just a load testing. I'm running there. Just notify your teams that you are doing this kind of exercises. And that can take some time, and then that's what you need to do there. And then you have also teams who are really running them every day in a pipeline. But it can be quite time-consuming and quite be expensive also, although it can scale quite a lot.
So it depends. So now I'm going to debate you on that one, and that's good. This is a discussion. We have to debate a bit. So yeah, it depends on what you're talking about.
You need to make a decision if you want to run it on a daily basis. Or you want to run it at the end of the sprint.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think on for load, with defined SLOs, your service level objectives, and your SLIs, you would want to have a very succinct set of tests for load testing that would catch that regression. right? You can have that fail criteria so that right there at code authoring time, you can catch it, and it's not adding a whole lot in terms of actual time in the pipeline and adding a bunch. You'd run it for about 2 minutes and then immediately catch things, which will save you a ton of time. Chaos, I think there's very specific faults. Internally, we call them nominal faults, and those are different types of faults that you might want to put into your pipeline, but they are very different than introducing sort of like larger chaos, exercises and or drills. I don't know if you want to add anything to the types of faults there, or.
Yeah, I would say just like, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, again, there's, for what Clemens mentioned, I think if you go in to do like drills and game days, which are more closer to your production environments or in Canary or somewhere on the shift right side of the spectrum, then you can use that to validate certain processes. So like kind of what we talked about with monitoring, you can do did the alerts fire as they were supposed to? Did your on-call team have all the TSGs that they wanted or needed to mitigate any issues that came up? Did auto mitigations fire? That kind of thing on that side of the spectrum. The more you move towards the CI/CD side, it gets, the complexity of the experiments might be smaller, more repetitive, and that kind of thing. So it very much depends on what your process is. Around it. But.
And the load test with multiple parameters would be very expensive because it would run for an hour. Wait, I see a question.
Hi, for best practice, I've got teams that both have multiple environments in a single Azure subscription and where they separate it. Is there a best practice for the Chaos Studio? Is it better to have them separated I think it's better to have them separated as separate accounts, but does the tool support, failing by resource group or that sort of concept?
So we don't make a demarcation between them. So as long as you onboard your resources that you're hoping to target as targets, so that's a resource type within Chaos Studio, you should be able to target it with the appropriate faults that are applicable to that target. So as I think in terms of organization, it's very much subjective to your infrastructure and kind of that plan that we're talking about. Like a lot of teams go through systematically and say, this is my application boundary, and here are all the things that could fail that I have mitigated for. That's another thing for Chaos Studio, is that you go into it with an idea of how your system will behave under disruption. So you don't necessarily go into it looking to find out what's going to happen if you break this thing. You already know what you expect might happen, and you go in to validate that and make sure that that is actually what happens and not something worse, right? Or it fails as if it's supposed to, gracefully. And so that kind of organization is left up to the teams themselves, but within resources, you can onboard anything as targets and apply the fault.
Question. Perfect. I was just going to say we have about 15 minutes left, so now we need questions.
So just drilling in a little bit, if I'm doing load testing, then I sort of automatically think I've got to make my testing environment match production, right? Otherwise, my failures aren't going to be valid. Yeah. But in Chaos Studio, in your experience, if I change the tier of the Azure service that I'm working on, is the engineered failure mode going to behave the same way? I guess bluntly, can I get away with a cheaper SKU for the Chaos Studio testing, right?
I have an answer, but I believe so, yes. That said, it might depend on which fault. So I think we have faults, and Shrunga, correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe there are faults like VM CPU pressure and those kinds of things. Obviously, those would have some, different responses related to the SKU. But for that, it would be safe to have sort of production for other types of faults, like, hey, I'm looking for a DNS outage or a KV, key vault outage and those kinds of things. Anything else you'd add, or?
I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's how do you make sure that your chaos experiment reflects, or if you're acting on like a non-production environment, then how do you make sure that the behavior is is what would happen in production?
It's getting away with the SKU size. So if you have something like with load, you have to have, oh, if I want this load to match exactly what prod is, then you'd have that larger SKU size, the things that you're running in prod.
Oh, I see.
Whereas like, oh, we're doing a DNS outage,
Okay, yeah.
It
then,
depends,
yeah,
I
it
think,
will
on the
very
fault.
much be dependent on the fault. Some of them might replicate exactly, I think, and some of them might not match one-to-one. So that might be an educated guess.
And I saw like one hand and another hand as well. Okay, well, I saw yours, but she is going here. I just want to make sure I'm seen.
In a hybrid environment, can you use Chaos Studio to trigger on-prem failures or simulate something like that?
I don't think so. On-prem? No.
Yeah, we do have like the agent-based faults that will like you install it on your VM and compute, but not directly. It has to be Azure.
Yeah, it is focused very on. Now, different, just to mix things up, Azure load testing, you can target on-prem endpoints, private endpoints, a whole variety. So Azure load testing is really around leveraging the cloud to generate the load and then hit that endpoint. And that can also be, all sorts of different types of endpoints and APIs.
Well, I have two questions.
Okay.
The first is related to reports that these tools can give to us to answer, for example, compliance questionnaires that in general we need to solve.
I had not thought of that. You're right.
And the second one is when it comes to chaos, I think about security. Are there any kind of failures related to security issues that we can try?
So so there's security on the Chaos Studio itself and all of the permission models Shrunga mentioned earlier. I think you're asking a very specific, hey, are there faults that help us show a nefarious attack, something like that. I don't know of any that I can think of. Like I could think of a DDoS attack from load testing, but I can't think of a security.
Nothing that one-to-one matches security right now, although we're working through a lot of feedback about like what customers see within our fault library and security. We've heard a few times now from customers, so we'd love to kind of hear your feedback on what kinds of, failure scenarios you'd like to replicate there, and we can one-to-one try and map together what that input looks like.
And Clemens, are you aware of any, just in terms of the broader view of chaos?
No, I only came also to the DDoS.
The DDoS attack. Okay. All right, I see this question and a couple of questions coming over here as well. Thank you.
Do you like to test under load? Or are you hitting it with the Azure load testing while you're doing the chaos?
Yeah. Which way do you want to? All right. So we actually see, currently we see a big use case where folks will start a load test to generate the load. So it simulates, okay, this thing's under load, it's acting just like it would, and then start a chaos experiment, and then usually stop it and then end the load test as well. We are working together to sort of see how we can make that a more integrated solution for our customers, because we know, but we don't have that yet.
So yeah, there are definitely scenarios where you can think of these kinds of load chaos testing scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a event up like this, what we have over here, 3,000 people log in at the same time, and then your Cosmos DB goes down.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have that as Microsoft.
No. Well, anybody,
and that's where you want to pinpoint, okay, can I do this or not? That's how you look at it. So I would definitely go for yes.
Well, one of my favorites is the AAD as well, because a lot of times what happens is it may not be an AAD outage. It could be your own service goes down, but as it's coming back up, guess what it does? All these logins that have been queued up start blasting, and so AAD starts throttling you. So that's a really classic pattern as well to think about with your services, which is, okay, when we go down, do we now have this queue that we are starting to blast to our auth systems, whatever auth system it is? Okay, a couple of questions here.
So kind of back to the hybrid. Can Chaos Studio
inject rules into NSGs or Azure Firewall that would simulate a loss of connection to on-prem or to a third-party API?
We do have like network
You keep
security.
messing with us.
We do have like network security group faults, so you can like set network security groups. I don't think that would translate to like on-prem directly, but you can use that for a lot of Azure network. Like you can block like service tags or a range of IP addresses or something. So even if you don't have like a specific fault for say like take down Azure storage or something like that, you can basically use the service tag for it and then deny access or like inbound, outbound. So that range of network faults we have. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I think there was one more question here.
Yeah, my question is pretty simple. I was wondering, does Azure Chaos Studio supports a load testing on GPU resources? For instance, GPU, like graphical.
So like GPRCs?
The GPU resource, NVIDIA, like.
Yeah. So one clarification, just to double check that I've got that question. So Azure Load Testing Service and Chaos Studio are sort of currently two different things. So if your question is, can we do Azure load tests against GPU? I believe so, but I want to get clarity after today's session. And the reason why is I saw for sure some work on that the team is working on to enable GPRC protocols, but I need to double check in terms of your GPU if that would work or not. So yeah, you tricked me with the simple question, and then I was like, that was not simple. So, but I love that question, so thank you. Keeping me on my toes.
Hopefully another simple question.
Yeah, stepping away.
Can Chaos Studio simulate, say, expiry of a client secret or certificate?
Oh, great question. Did you hear that one?
Yeah, I think so. I would have to double check through our fault library, but I think there should be something that replicates that scenario. So there's like a full documentation list of all of our faults and what exactly each of them do, and we update it as soon as we add anything more. So if you look through that list and we can chat afterwards in case you don't see what you're expecting. Yeah, for sure.
Other questions? Anyone else? All right, perfect. I was going to say we're in the last 5 minutes, so I wanted to make sure.
So I would think a goal would be to have your self-healing infrastructure. So if a network security group gets messed with, I'd like my Terraform or my Bicep to be able to just redeploy it. But if Chaos Studio is just kind of faking that, like I'm not really getting to test my infrastructure resiliency, or do I? Like am I missing something there?
I'm not as familiar with Terraform, so I will first tell you on that one. And I don't know the system that just auto brings it back. But what I have seen, and then Shrunga giving you also some time, a lot of times, like I have a demo where we basically take an AKS API pod and just completely delete it, right? And so we expect that AKS pod to get regenerated, and it does. Right? Now, if we take away the key vault, where it's actually, to regenerate that pod, it actually has to go up to key vault to get that connection, then it fails. So we test it that way. What I'd love to do, and it might have to be after the session, is look at what that self-healing, those different properties are, because yes, we should be able to say, let's just wipe this thing out as part of the chaos experiment. And what's nice with Chaos Studio is you can have multiple branches. So you can add different things to bring an entirety to your experiment. And you can say, okay, I want to do this, then this, then this. And you might say, that's my experiment. And now I'm going to add one other component. And now I know that this combination, this we don't know how to recover from. But let's double check on it.
I like the part of
the
ID there.
Yeah.
Is can part of your resilient architecture be that your pipelines are kicked off to do a redeployment? That's the idea, actually, and that's what I like. When you
that's what the AZD
wipe your Azure subscription, and then it redeploys. It kicks off Azure DevOps pipeline and redeploys everything and after a few minutes, everybody's happy there. I can think about a scenario that works there.
I'm like, and I can think of a scenario where it wouldn't. So it depends on what the fault is. No, I'm like,
yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like, kind of to Jen's point on like how you can structure your experiments. We have faults and actions, and so you can construct your experiments in ways that like simulate certain failure scenarios, but are not in the fault itself. So, like the common example we use is that like, you know, when you're saying take down my Azure storage, it's not necessarily that we're shutting down your storage, you're just blocking access. So there's like a little bit of a kind of a creative gap between what is happening, you know, actually versus what scenario you're simulating. And so
really
we encourage everybody when you're building out your experiment to think about that scenario and construct your faults accordingly, so that you're testing what you want to, not necessarily exactly the action itself.
Any other questions? We are at the last 4 minutes. So, stalling really quick.
Got a question here.
One more. Awesome. Thank you.
Have you ever, is there a pattern or something you see where you combine load testing with like fuzzing?
Oh, great question. Actually, we have seen that with some engineering teams internally. We don't have a best practice around it yet, but I love that one. And both fuzzing of APIs as well as sort of fuzzing tons of stuff. I'd love to learn from you.
I have different code paths that do different validations,
Oh,
or
nice.
split, and different things are going to get called based on that input. So
Okay, I need to pick your brain.
I don't have a brain yet.
Okay, well, we'll learn together and stumble through. But yeah, I love that combination. Very good. Any others? Again, thank you. I know it's 4 o'clock. Big, busy day. We have, I think, one more slide. So again, just to keep the links easy, here's also some links so folks can quickly take some pictures. And it includes some of the Azure Mission Critical. They have some incredible content. We work very closely with them. I'm going to wait until everyone's gotten their pictures there. Yeah, just 1 second. I see one more camera. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Azure load testing. Well, I was like, where I'm trying to get to. I'm on stage. I'm on stage, woo! So we do have some other sessions. Like I mentioned, tomorrow morning we have a virtual lab. We would love your feedback. Always helps us to get these to be richer conversations. So do let us know how we can improve the conversation. And then I'll just point out, I see some pictures grabbing that QR code, so I don't want to go. This is fabulous. Thank you. A couple more cameras. I have only one more slide. I promise.
Please show the second link slide again.
Okay, we'll do in just a second, Stuart. All right, this last slide is just the other sessions that we have on all things testing. Anytime you want to talk testing, breaking things, I am available. Jen P. at Microsoft. Shrunga, thank you so much for joining us today. And Clemens, it was wonderful to hear from you. Thank you very much. And Stuart, online, I will go back. There's just a few folks taking pictures, so. Yeah, that one's the very next session. It's just down the hallway. In fact, Debbie had to run and leave for that, so we will thank her. All right, I am going back on one last two. I think it was Chaos Studio that was requested. All right, with that, I just want to thank you all so much. Again, have a great rest of your build, and we look forward to talking with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.